Good morning, folks. Welcome to this Early Ed Month panel for Southeast Louisiana, hosted by United Way of Southeast Louisiana and so many of our partners here that are with us today. My name is Kirby Jane Nagel, and I'll be facilitating today's meeting. I want to thank you all for joining us early on this humid, soon-to-be stormy day. It's a pleasure to have you all here with us. Folks, as you come into the waiting room, just sit tight. We'll begin on time. We're going to be prompt today. We've got a lot of important content to bring to you around early care and education access in Southeast Louisiana. Important speakers we want to make sure that we have time to hear. As you're coming into the room, folks, please take note. We'll be using the chat feature today as well as some polling. Want to make sure that you have an opportunity to engage with our speakers. You'll see that this is a meeting, not a webinar, and that's intentional. We want to make sure that you feel a part of today's conversation. So I do encourage you, as you enter the Zoom, you can use the view feature to make sure that you have it on either side-by-side speaker or side-by-side gallery, so that the speaker of the time will be the primary feature for you there. And again, as we go throughout the day, you'll have opportunities to engage with our speakers, with our attendees, and of course, use that chat feature as well. We're just a few minutes out from beginning. We'll give everyone just a few more minutes to enter the room. Sit tight for just a few seconds as folks join us online. I want to remind folks today too, as well, that this session will be recorded. So if you're having any technical difficulties as you join us or audio glitches, we'll share this with you following today's meeting so that you can recap anything you might have missed, share it with your network. Recap any of the information that you'd like to revisit. With that, I'll review some of our housekeeping notes for today. I want to thank you again all for joining us for this Early Ed Month panel for Southeast Louisiana. We have a wonderful slate of speakers that we'll get to in just a few moments. Reminder, folks, as I said, this is recorded and will be shared with you following today's session. We ask that you remain on mute during our presentation and our panel section, as we will give you opportunities for an open question and answer with our speakers at the end of the scheduled presentation. A reminder, folks, please use the chat feature throughout today's portion to engage, to ask questions. We will give you an opportunity to do that. And we will have polls as well that we hope you'll engage with us on so we can get more information, engage kind of your knowledge and your experiences with early child care and education in our region. With that, one last reminder, folks, this is a meeting, not a webinar, intentionally. So if you'd like to use the view feature within Zoom to make sure that you can see our speakers properly, you can use the side-by-side speaker or side-by-side gallery option so that you can see the action at hand. And with that, I'd like to introduce my friend, our president and CEO of United Way of Southeast Louisiana, Michael Williamson. Michael, please take it away.
All right, thanks Kirby for getting us started. Let me also first thank our panelists and attendees today for joining us for this virtual panel on the importance of high quality early care and education. Special thanks go to our co-hosts, our friends at the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children and the Louisiana Early Childhood Business Roundtable. This also would not be possible without our sponsors. We'd like to thank our friends at Entergy for being the presenting sponsor, and then the other folks you saw on our slide earlier that listed other sponsors that have joined us as well. Just a few quick things, and I know we're going to dive deep into this with our panelists today, but yeah, the fundamental question is, why does United Way of Southeast Louisiana care about high quality early care and education? And I just want to hit 3 points. I know folks are going to drill down into it, but most importantly, 90% of the brain development among our children takes place between birth and age 4. So those are the formative years, and that's the time we shape a child's brain. We also recognize that there's about $1.3 billion lost every year due to Louisiana's childcare issues and lost workforce productivity, et cetera. Recognizing that 2 in 3 parents with young children are not in the workforce because they're unable to find quality childcare. And so to sum it up, for us, it's simple. United Way of Southeast Louisiana believes that high quality early care and education and the equitable access to it is good for children, it's good for families, and it's good for business. And so once again, we're pleased to have all you with us today. We're going to get into our speakers and panelists in just a minute. But I'd like to introduce you to a video from the governor of the great state of Louisiana and friend to United Way and many others, John Bel Edwards.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to join you in kicking off Louisiana's first Early Education Month. In fact, I've been pleased to sign this proclamation, dated the 1st of February, so that throughout the month of February, we can celebrate together Early Education Month. You know, despite the difficult challenges facing our state, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and recovery from devastating hurricanes, we've learned how important early care and education are for our students, their families, and our economy. Last year, 60% of our kindergarten students did not meet critical benchmarks at their start of school. And studies show that our economy loses $1.3 billion every year due to breakdowns within our child care system. We can do better. We must do better. By working together, we can help ensure that every child has access to quality early care and education, which will set them on the path to success and develop a reliable workforce to grow our businesses and our economy. It's a win-win for everyone. Thank you for your continued partnership. Enjoy the event, and God bless.
Well, certainly we want to thank Governor Edwards for his time and for his commitment to early care and education. We know his advocacy work in this space means so much to our fight to make sure that every child, every family has equitable access to quality, affordable childcare. So thank you so much to his team and to himself for lending his voice to this fight. At this point, I'd like to introduce our panelists for the scripted portion of our section today, scripted questions rather. Charmaine Caccioppi, Executive Vice President and CEO of United Way of Southeast Louisiana. Dionne Cousin Graham, Executive Director of East St. Tammany Rainbow Child Care Center. Rebecca Holmes, Attorney for United for Early Childhood Education Initiative. Patty Riddlebarger, Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility of Entergy Corporation, and Dr. Libbie Sonnier, Executive Director of Louisiana Policy Institute for Children. It's a pleasure to have these distinguished experts and advocates with us today. Now, before we get to the panel discussion, I'd like to poll our attendees here and ask you all, relaunch that poll, a simple question. What do you think the average cost of childcare is for high quality care for an infant in Southeast Louisiana? Give you all just a few moments to chime in here. Looks like we've got a pretty informed group of folks with us. No surprise there. And with that, just a few more seconds. Folks, keep in mind that childcare is an expense, a high expense for families in Southeast Louisiana. We're going to hear more about that in just a second. And with that, I'll reveal that it is actually, in fact, $8,700 a year for high quality early care and education for a single infant in our state, here in Southeast Louisiana. Understanding that that's the largest single budget item. So certainly it's easy to understand how families are struggling to afford access. With that, I'd like to start with our first question for a panelist, Dr. Libbie Sonnier. Libbie, can you help expand on the poll and level set this discussion by explaining why access to quality, affordable childcare is so important for families and how many of our Louisiana families continue to lack access to the high quality care?
Absolutely. So what we know is that for Louisiana to truly thrive, it must take the steps necessary to ensure that all families can access robust, affordable early care and education. And it's expensive because we know little people need quality early care and education, again, to thrive. And those expenses come from making sure that we have a reliable workforce working in childcare. We also know that we have reduced teacher-child ratios when children are young, and that really, as that you all have demonstrated at United Way of Southeast Louisiana and other United Ways, is if we look at a family's budget, childcare is the single highest expense. We know that investing in high quality early care and education will first and foremost prepare children in Louisiana so that they are entering in school prepared to learn. Making this investment will also ensure that they will continue to be prepared for success long term. And we know that research shows high quality early care and education programs help children experience fewer referrals for special education services, fewer grade retentions, and increased likelihood to graduate from high school. These high quality programs can have a long-term health benefits for children, as well as reducing the child's likelihood for future involvement in criminal justice system. Additionally, Louisiana Child Care, they continue to recover from the pandemic in order to serve young children and families across the state, and the state and federal funding is crucial. And so you asked a question about how many Louisiana families continue to lack access to childcare in our state. And I wanted to capture Southeast Louisiana. And there are approximately 40,000 children in need birth through age 4 in Southeast Louisiana, yet only about 30% are able to access publicly funded seats, leaving over 28,000 children unserved in our region in Southeast Louisiana. We need to close this gap, make sure that our youngest learners maximize their potential by giving them and their families access to high quality early care and education. And while there's room for improvement, there's also reason to be hopeful for the future, particularly at the local levels when we think about what's happened in the greater New Orleans region, both in Orleans Parish and in Jefferson, with local governments saying that this is critically important to them and they are making those investments locally.
Thank you so much, Libbie. And certainly a case for understanding the need to expand access in Louisiana and make sure that families have affordable options when they do have a need. With that, Charmaine, I'd like to turn to you as Libbie just illustrated the scope of need in Louisiana and of course why closing the gap is so important. Give us a little update for folks who may not be familiar with some of the recent legislative wins, legislative progress on the state level and right here at home in regards to access to early care and education.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present some really good information this morning. But I would be remiss in not acknowledging that so many of the people that are joining us today joined with the United Way of Southeast Louisiana, with the Policy Institute for Children, and supported the efforts of the Ready Louisiana Coalition statewide. Last year at the state level, I'm pleased to report that we were successful in securing legislation, Senate Bill 142, which actually contained a commitment of 25% of all sports betting revenue, up to $20 million, to the Louisiana Early Childhood Education Fund. We in particular wanted to thank and acknowledge the extraordinary leadership of Senator Rick Ward in that effort, who sponsored that legislation. We got 50% of the NBA Pelicans specialty license plate revenue, which will now be dedicated and go to the Louisiana Early Childhood Education Fund. The legislature passed House Bill 601. We in particular want to thank all of our advocates, but acknowledge Representative Jonathan Goudeau for his leadership in authoring that legislation. I would be remiss in not acknowledging that a really sweeping victory for us in this past legislative session was that diapers and feminine hygiene products will no longer be taxed in the state of Louisiana. The legislature passed House Bill 7. And I can tell you, this is a big relief for our working families and the children, along with our child care providers. We would be remiss in not acknowledging the extraordinary leadership and commitment of Representative Amy Freeman, who sponsored and authored that legislation. A new post-secondary community college grant program for adults will now explore child care benefits for award recipients. The legislature passed Senate Bill 148, which created the MJ Mike Foster program. And now this program will allow us to look at child support supplements for the individuals who qualify for this program. I would be remiss in not acknowledging the extraordinary commitment that continues to be made by the New Orleans City Council and Mayor LaToya Cantrell. How thrilled we are that their commitment over the many years, started off at $750,000, has expanded to $3 million with the extraordinary leadership of Council President Helena Moreno. Just this year, they introduced a dedicated tax that will, in fact, go before the voters in April, and this could mean substantial increased investment to serve a greater proportionate share of children in need in Orleans Parish. I am delighted to report that we work, and I have the privilege of chairing the Jefferson Parish Ready Start Network. I want to acknowledge the strong leadership of Cerintha Strickland as our executive director, but I do want to acknowledge that the Jefferson Parish Council, under the leadership of Scott Walker, they actually have committed $225,000 to early care and education. These are making a profound difference for the families that we serve, and they're building increased capacity for what the state is doing and what all the not-for-profits joining us today are investing in early care and education. I couldn't be more proud to help lead that work with my colleague Libbie, Sonnier, and so many here. It takes a village to support this kind of progress, and I am confident in the coming year we will expand what we are receiving and actually finally in our history meet the commitment that the Early Care and Education Commission says is necessary to serve all children in Louisiana.
Thank you so much, Charmaine. It's certainly obvious that the Network of Advocates United Way and LPIC you're working with are making progress. And yet, of course, as we're going to continue to highlight today, there's a long way to go. And we're grateful you all joined us today to learn more about that. Before we go on to our next question, I want to come back to our attendees today and launch a second poll here. We want to hear from you about your experience as a caregiver. If you're someone who has been a parent or someone responsible for a child, have childcare issues ever impacted your employment, missing work, perhaps having to turn down a promotion or a new job, reduced hours as a part of your need to take care of your children? Certainly, we're hearing from parents across the state that these are some of the issues that are affecting them. We want to hear from you. Are these some challenges that you've experienced perhaps daily now through the pandemic or during your career as an employee? And we can see here, folks, just early on, that in fact, the majority of our attendees today have in fact experienced these issues. Certainly you can understand these challenges aren't just for the families with young children, it impacts the families as a whole. And our next question, I want to turn to our partner and our friend, Patty Riddlebarger, for more information on how the workforce impacts of child care affect families and the economy at large. Of course, as we mentioned, sometimes these issues are just seen as a problem for the families with young children. The research Entergy has supported shows that that's far from the case. We know that's not true. Can you share some of the impacts of childcare breakdowns for employers and employees, and why Entergy is so invested in this issue right here at home, Patty?
Sure, of course. Thank you. Thank you, Kirby. Entergy has long been a supporter of investments in high quality early care and education. As one of the region's major employers, we recognize that high quality early care results in increased productivity, improved economic mobility, and peace of mind for working parents. And there is a strong business case for investments in early childhood. We know that gaps in childcare and availability of high quality care negatively impact both businesses and working families. A recent analysis conducted by the Louisiana Policy Institute and the Babineau Blanco Policy Institute showed that a lack of adequate child care results in employee absences and turnover that cost Louisiana employers $762 million annually. And in addition to the direct cost of business, there's a ripple effect, including lost wages and tax revenues, that results in an overall loss of $1.3 billion to the Louisiana economy. An earlier study funded by Entergy showed a significant impact on working families as well. 14% of families, Louisiana families in that study, reported having to turn down a promotion due to gaps in childcare. 16% had to quit a job because of gaps in childcare, and 8% of parents reported that they had been fired at some point as a result of gaps in childcare. We also know that gaps in childcare and early education negatively impact economic development. Availability of skilled workforce is the top criteria for corporate relocation. And we also know that employers need for their employees to have access to high quality early care. Both of these needs are linked. We know that investments in early childhood can move this needle. That's why over the past 2 years, Entergy has funded more than $500,000 in grants to support increasing access to high quality care for children from working families. This includes a $300,000 challenge for the New Orleans City Seats program, as well as more recently, $50,000 in grants to help child care owners recover from the impact of Hurricane Ida, which impacted their businesses significantly. As a state, we've made significant progress in the past 20 years. I have personally seen it. But despite the progress, high quality care and education remains out of reach for far too many families. And that's why we're here, to shine a light on the need and to ask our legislators to invest in our state's greatest and most precious natural resource, our children and their families. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patty. Of course, no greater partner in this space and in advocating on behalf of those families and employers that believe in equitable access to this care is important. And so we're grateful that Entergy and Patty are always willing to lend their voice to this issue. At this point, folks, I want to welcome in another video, an important one at that, to give you a glimpse into what life is like for a child care provider and for a parent in recent times during the pandemic. We also have with us today, of course, a regional child care provider that's going to provide with you a more detailed insight, and you're welcome to ask some questions at the conclusion of our panel discussion. But right now, we'll share with you a video of a partner child care center up the road in Zachary, and of course, a parent as well. And we'd love for you all to share your thoughts and reactions to this video in the chat as you watch along.
My name is Ashley Henderson. I'm a parent here at Kids Carousel. My child, Savannah Osborne, attends the school, and then I have another child that'll be coming along that I'm excited that will be attending Kids Carousel, Zachary, as well.
We have 7 centers across Southeast Louisiana, and they are all under one entity, which is Kids Carousel, LLC. The one that we're currently at is in Zachary, Louisiana. Good job. As a company, we serve over 800 families. We have the capacity right now for about 1,200. This location has around 109. We're licensed for 175. We have a lot of braided funding, so we have private pay, we have child care assistance. Most recently, we have joined with EBR in doing micro centers, which are child care centers inside of elementary schools, and then diverse delivery programs, which are also a classroom inside of one of our centers, but it is an actual EBR parish school classroom, and they fund those. The parents do not have to pay anything for those spaces. The financial loss in the past 2 years as a company has been over $1 million. We were one of the few centers that we didn't charge our parents the first year of COVID. And so we wrote off a lot of things, and then we lost a lot of parents that lost their jobs.
When COVID first took off, I was laid off from my job for a little while, so I was home with my child, so that wasn't really a big issue. But getting back into the work field, it did take me some time to, get back on my feet. But I really like the fact that they were able to provide some type of support for the parents when COVID began, and, we had some assistance.
You put it together, Mac? Good job, Mac.
For 2 years, parents were not allowed to step foot inside of a center. So you have moms like Miss Ashley that are pregnant, and then they can't come into a center and see a facility. They can't talk to a teacher. They can't see what's going on and actually have a verbal conversation what their child's day was like and just see the setting. And so we've opened 2 centers during COVID, and some of those parents, up until maybe 3 months ago, they had never stepped foot inside of a center. You're trusting people with your child's well-being, and you can't even see where they are. We are very fortunate. We've always had cameras installed in all of our locations, which was pretty much a godsend for COVID because the parents can log in and see what's going on with their kids.
Childcare is very important for me because it allows me to go out and be able to work and provide for my family, and I really get that here at Kids Carousel. They're very hands-on. Anytime something's going on, they'll call. I love the fact that they email monthly when things are going on. They have calendars. I know what my child's eating. I know what type of activities they're doing. So I really feel like it's important that I don't have to drive 30 minutes or an hour to find quality care. I can find it right here in my community.
Oh, look how beautiful. So we are scientists, didn't miss.
I have directors at each of the locations to run and manage the centers from day to day. They deal with the parents, the children, the staff, and everything else that's going on in the centers. At this location, we have Ms. Donna, Ms. Roxy, and Ms. Tanya, and they do a wonderful job collectively to run the center. I would say the hardest part of this job is probably staffing. The turnover in centers it's very hard. The economy really thrives on childcare and high quality childcare where it's a setting like we have, and you're not sitting at home with grandma and watching TV all day. You're actually teaching children to be productive citizens one day, and birth through 5 is like the most important times.
And I'm really excited about my new child coming here as well, because I feel comfortable with the care that they provide and the level of communication that they provide to the parents.
So Louisiana Policy Institute, they have worked well with getting the funding down to the centers, and I hate that COVID had to happen to put a spotlight on us to know that we're essential, but we never closed, not one time. And when you're responsible for over 800 families, and before COVID, it would have been more than that, but when you're responsible for that many lives, then that's like 1,600 parents who they're relying on us. So the funding that came from like ARPA, the American Rescue Plan, and things like that, it has helped tremendously. We would not have made it the past 2 years without the funding. We definitely would have been in the red, and it's afforded us to be able to give teachers bonuses and directors bonuses and pay more, and really everybody wants to do that at their child care centers.
Thank you so much to our friends at LPIC and of course Entergy for sponsoring that wonderful video. Give you a little insight, a little peek into what life is like in the last few months for childcare providers and parents. And with that, we're going to kind of shift gears here in our panel discussion and continue that conversation more about the centers and the center providers. At this point, I'd like to welcome in Rebecca Holmes as attorney from United for Early Care and Education Initiative, partnership between United Way and Loyola University College of Law. Rebecca, we heard some of the challenges from our partner provider in Zachary, and certainly through the program that you helped to lead, United for Early Care and Education, you worked directly with these center providers across Southeast Louisiana to help them access federal programming, federal funding like the payroll protection loan, we know was essential to help these centers stay open or stay afloat if they did have to face temporary closures. Can you share a few of the key takeaways that you learned during your time leading this program and having such intimate relationships with these providers during some of the most difficult and challenging times?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And first, let me just say it was an honor to work on that program that ran from right around May 2020, right after the CARES Act was declared to provide support and assistance for COVID-19, but also up until the end of 2021, because there was a reauthorization of PPP or Paycheck Protection Program loans. So there were in fact 2 possible loan disbursements for the Paycheck Protection Program to help employers retain and hire on new staff when needed. So a huge portion of the problems that a lot of our childcare directors and owners saw was retaining staff. It was a very difficult time to keep people on, especially if staff is elderly, if they are persons who are immunocompromised or they have their own children to take care with and no childcare available. Those were all very difficult issues for them to overcome. In addition, there are people who just needed to take care of family members, and because unemployment was high in other areas like the service industry, especially in the New Orleans area, that made it really difficult for employers to keep staff on, even good staff that they wanted to keep on. So part of the huge boost of the Paycheck Protection Program, parts 1 and parts 2, were the ability to, like the former director just said, pay bonuses, pay hazard pay, actually increase wages. Staff that works at early childhood education centers have to be trained, they have to have background checks, they have to comply with a lot of Department of Education regulations that come from HHS, DHS, and OSHA. So they were bombarded, and quite necessarily, but bombarded with COVID-19 safety and health regulations throughout this process to keep children safe and to keep their centers open and operating and available to the public. So through all of that, hiring has become much more difficult for centers. Finding qualified persons who can come on, making sure that they're maintaining health and safety standards that are changing rapidly as new information is coming out from the CDC. In addition, some centers had to actually make building modifications in order to comply with some of the new regulations that were promulgated under the Louisiana Department of Education. Again, those were guided by the CDC and other federal regulations. So they had to make these changes. So they had to expend more money. So their costs for operating almost universally were raised. So while some centers did experience receiving funding from various sources that increased their overall revenue in that 2-year span, their expenses also were dramatically increased, and the majority of centers are struggling to keep the doors open and are concerned about that in the future. So going forward, the fact that we don't have a new plan for reauthorization of paycheck protection or EIDL funds is damaging and devastating. It makes it very difficult for center directors and owners to plan for the future and how they're going to keep staff on and keep paying them closer to a living wage and give them bonuses and give them hazard mitigation pay, which have all been really big incentives to keep good, qualified, high quality staff available and working in these centers. In addition, we saw a lot of needs in these centers. For the centers that we surveyed, our survey responders said that some of their biggest challenges that they needed help with just to get paycheck protection program loan funds forgiven, most of what their needs were time. They didn't have time to gather documents. They didn't have the admin support that they needed in order to get all the paperwork together to prove compliance for these systems. So sometimes just having the administrative and HR support available, partially even to tell and inform parents how their policies have changed around health and safety and around how they're caring for their students, are really important to these centers and need to be increased. So other things that we polled and had takeaways were centers reported at 29% that they needed budgeting help, 35% said they needed marketing help, over 50% said they needed CPA and bookkeeping assistance, 29% said they needed computer software and computer literacy assistance, and training. With those types of supports, even having the software itself could be very, very helpful for some centers to automate payroll and reduce the amount of administrative work that they have to do in order to keep these centers running. Because in addition to being trainers, teachers, quality providers, caring for children, making sure children are well fed and are being educated and in a safe environment, they also have to be business owners. And that is a lot to ask of one person. And in many cases, that's exactly how the center is operating. So another area that was identified for support at 24% was HR support. And hopefully part of that is policy and reaching out and having universal communications of policy changes to parents as those regulations change. So those were some of the biggest areas of need that we saw. And we really hope that at some point, additional funding will be reauthorized for those centers that need forgivable loans.
Rebecca, thank you so much. I know likely some of our attendees will have additional questions for you as you covered such rich information so quickly. Keep in mind, folks, as she highlights and illustrates the challenges centers are facing, that means the parents and employers and children are facing implications from those challenges as well. So certainly ripple effects, as Michael pointed out, a crisis within a crisis for those families and folks relying on the providers. At this time, folks, before we begin, I'd like to say to highlight our keynote speaker, our child care provider today. We're going to launch a final poll here just to give you another understanding, to illustrate the number of folks that are relying on quality care or care outside the home. What percentage of Louisiana families with young children rely on formal childcare outside of the home? And this is thankfully according to our friends at LPIC, a recent survey they've been conducting. If you'd like to learn more information on their research, it's all available on their website there. Lots of data, important data that's been collected throughout the pandemic that can provide you more information if you're interested. And as folks are chiming in, keep in mind, right, in Louisiana and in Southeast Louisiana, over half of households don't make enough money to make ends meet, which means they likely struggle to afford quality care. And as we let this poll come to a close, we've got answers all over the board. I'll share the results with you here and inform you that 85% of Louisiana families with young children rely on this formal care, meaning that half of households struggle to afford childcare as is. We know those households and families, that number is even higher. So you can imagine there's a significant need for affordable access in our community. With that, as I mentioned, we're going to bring on Dionne Cousin Graham, Executive Director of East St. Tammany Rainbow Child Care Center, a partner of United Way of Southeast Louisiana. And Dionne, if you will, just share briefly with us just a little bit of history on your center before I ask you a follow-up question to get some more information on how your center weathered the pandemic thus far.
Okay, thanks so much, Jane. Good morning, everybody. Rainbow was actually started in 1983 to address the need for affordable childcare in the greater Slidell area. It was started by two local churches, Macedonia Baptist Church and Aldersgate United Methodist Church. At different times, we were located on both church campuses, and we actually received our nonprofit status in 1985. And in 1986, we became a United Way partner agency. And that partnership allowed us to purchase a building and grow as the need for affordable childcare was great. We serve on average 175 at-risk children each year from low-income working families and families in crisis with a high-quality program. Our rates are based on income, and as long as a parent is employed or enrolled in an educational program, they're able to register their child. 96% of our families are single parents, and 98% of our children leave Rainbow meeting their developmental milestones and entering kindergarten ready to learn.
I'm pressing spacebar in the chat instead of trying to unmute myself. We're having all sorts of technical fun today. Dionne, thank you so much for sharing that. And we're so grateful you're a longstanding partner of United Way of Southeast Louisiana. Certainly you're serving the children and families in your community well. I'll ask you the follow-up question, as I mentioned, how has the pandemic affected your center, your families, your employees, and enrollment?
Do you want the good, the bad, and the ugly?
We'll take it all.
Okay. Well, let's start with the good. There's a light shining on childcare right now. I've heard others say that today, and it is absolutely true. The PPP, ARPA, and CCAP, the Child Care Assistance Program, has provided us with some funding that has allowed us to keep our doors open, along with United Way. And childcare is essential, especially to the demographic that we serve. And caregivers can't work or attend school without childcare. It truly is the backbone of the economy. And I say this not just because education is so important and has been my life's work, but because I was also a single mom at the age of 18 and a first-generation college student. I would not have had a chance in this world without childcare. The bad is our program has remained consistent in its execution, serving Alice families and, providing our mission to strengthen working families. However, there's been a lot of inconsistency in enrollment, in staffing, in planning with a lack of funding. Teachers are underpaid and fearful, adding additional stress to their lives. And the only thing that really has been consistent is change. Before 2020, our newest hire had been with us for 6 years. Our turnover at Rainbow has always been very, very low. We have several that have been with us for over 20 years. And out of 13 employees, we had 5 teachers that resigned in the past 2 years over COVID. The ugly is the pandemic has taken lives. Teachers and children are dealing with grief, different family structures, and trying to find ways to mitigate all of the above while getting the job done. And right now, there are 4 of our highly trained teachers that could leave today and get a job at McDonald's making $4 more per hour in the city of Slidell. The work that we do is vital. And, how do we continue to provide an academic foundation for at-risk children while providing a mechanism of change for parents to work and attend school without the funding to provide the tools necessary to make that change. You know, and reward. Now, I really don't want to say reward. It's not a reward. Fair compensation means that early childhood educators have the tools they need to be effective in setting up children for success, and, you know, providing them with quality care and early educational experiences.
John, I want to thank you for that truly emotional response, because I think it's sort of lost on some of folks like myself who don't have children, and we understand the need and we understand the impacts, but to hear a real true story from a provider like yourself and like so many others in our region, certainly it's easy to lose sight of some of the personal impacts and costs. And so thank you for your candidness. At this time, folks, I want to open up the floor to our attendees. If you have a question, I ask you to use the raise your hand function. We'll be able to call on you, take you off mute, and have a conversation with any of our panelists today. Or if there's an anecdote you'd like to share with us, certainly we'd like to hear it as well. I do want to ask a question as we talk about some of the labor and the workforce issues for providers themselves, as Dionne highlighted and Rebecca did as well. Our friend provided in the chat, Ron McLean, our public policy chair for United Way of Southeast Louisiana, information on a recent report that should put off some alarm bells for all of us in Southeast Louisiana. And Libbie, I want to pose to you a question. As Ron stated here, that there's reports that the child care industry has lost a third of its workforce since the pandemic. Of course, as I say, they're sounding the alarm bells. As it stands today, there's not enough access. If we continue to see this decline, I mean, just generally speaking, how worried should the average household here in Southeast Louisiana be?
I hate to be an alarmist, but I say we need to be worried. We won't be able to staff childcare centers if we don't have early care and education teachers. And what we also know is many of these early care and education teachers are not making a livable wage. On average in the state of Louisiana, it's around a little bit of over $9 an hour. You can't take care of a family on that. And so the very people that are helping take care of our children are vulnerable to not being able to cover their own bills and take care of their own families. And so that stress passes on. And so we've got to do better. We've got to figure out workforce solutions. And I know many of us on this Zoom today are working hard at figuring that out. And we're not figuring it out in silos. We're figuring it out together because we know that they're not your babies or my babies. They're our babies in the state of Louisiana, and that's critically important. And then I saw Sonnier Joseph, who's a child care owner in our area, raise her hand, and I want to kick it to her because it's real life, just like Dionne, about what the child care industry is facing.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Libbie. I'm in New Orleans, and when you talk about workforce, you're also dealing with teachers who are dealing with trauma themselves, who come to deal with children who are dealing with trauma. And so that's part of the reason why we're losing so many teachers as well, because even if you can afford to pay them a good salary, there's so many other wraparound services that we refer to all the time with children, but we also need to think about that when we look at our workforce. Teachers are struggling with personal issues at home, not only the loss from COVID, but just mental health in general. And I think that's really causing a lot of turnover. And we need some way, funding or something, to help address that issue. I have high demand at my center. We have more than one center. We have 3 of them, and we have empty classrooms not because we don't have the children, it's because we don't have the staff. We talk about waitlist. Parents are like freaking out, like, when can I come? I'm like, I can't tell you anything until maybe summer or beyond, because nobody leaves once they get here because people have to go to work. But if I could hire the qualified staff, I could fill the rest of those empty classrooms. And that's really the issue. So we need support. And even when you look at even owners and directors, I think that we need to support them as well, particularly when you talk about small mom and pops who have been forced to become these professional organizations just to qualify for this funding, right? So now all of a sudden they really do have to concern themselves as Rebecca stated, with, not only taking care of day-to-day operations, but managing their finances. They've become, accountants, not intentionally, but they've had to become accountants. I've been in this business over 30 years. I got myself certified in human resources just to deal with all of this stuff going on, because I'm like, oh my God, there's so much. I need to be up to date on what's going on and how to manage these things. So it's really a lot. And I think everything needs some type of wraparound service. And of course, that comes with funding. And we are fortunate that everybody finally gets it. Oh my God, when I hear people regurgitate all the stuff we've been saying for the past 20 years, I'm like, yay, they get it. So now what do we do now that we got it? That's our next step. Thank you.
And I'd like to welcome Keith Lederman to the floor, another partner of United Way of Southeast Louisiana and a friend of so many advocates, organizations, and guests with us on today's call. Thank you, Keith.
Yeah, thanks, Kirby. And it's great to see everybody and talk about all these super important issues. And I want to just go back to what Sonnier was just mentioning about the salaries. And also what was said prior to that in terms of the average statewide for the early learning workforce teachers is about $9 an hour. The kind of word that we don't like to say is subsidies, but the only way that we're ever going to get to the point where we have a workforce that is well paid as it should be and able to be sustained far into the future in early learning is through public and private subsidies, government subsidies, private foundation and corporate support subsidies. If we're going to get from $9 an hour to $25 an hour, which is where we need to be at a minimum for teacher wages, we're not going to be able to pass that cost, nor should we pass that cost along to our consumers, to our customers who are parents and families and kids, most of whom can't even come close to affording what we're already providing at $9 an hour. So I think we really need to drill it into everybody's head in our state that there is no other solution except for subsidies and heavily subsidizing childcare centers and providers throughout the state. If we're ever going to get out of this workforce crisis that we've been in pre-pandemic, it's gotten, as Ron pointed out, much worse since the pandemic. But every survey you look at, as Libbie can tell you, that talks about why people are leaving the workforce. Yes, fear is a big factor, but bottom line is people don't get paid enough to do this and make the sacrifices that they're making to stay in the workforce. Subsidies, the S word, we've got to scream it from the rooftops, because it's not going to happen without subsidies. Just not going to happen.
Thanks so much, Keith. Charmaine, I want to bring you back on. I received a question via direct chat. Can you give us a pulse, an understanding of what elected officials are saying around this issue as we are, like it or not, getting closer and closer to the regular session?
Well, I'm pleased to report that we have, I think, the strongest bipartisan support. I think you can see by what we've established through the Ready Louisiana Coalition that we now have probably the most aggressive statewide advocacy group coming together. They are making those calls to their legislators. They are reaching out to the governor. They are calling and making sure that everyone understands the information that we have been given through the tremendous work that's been done by the Policy Institute allows us to validate why this is so important. But let me tell you, it's where the rubber meets the road. These legislators are hearing directly from their constituents as to what it means to them. They're hearing directly from the business community what it means to them. And I have to tell you, as we saw reflected in the governor's budget, we have an incredible opportunity this year to finally reach a threshold of funding at the state level that has never been realized. We need to keep our voices loud. We need to reach out. We need to continue, as we're doing this month, to give voice to this critical work that we are doing. And we need to not be shy. I feel like I'm channeling Michael Williamson and our volunteer commitment at the United Way right now. We need to continue to talk about the work that United Way as a leading not-for-profit is doing in making strategic investment and talking about what the work is that's innovative that we did during this COVID crisis to really bring on this partnership with our partners at Loyola College of Law. What we did to not only allow these early care centers to survive, but to thrive was monumental. And the economic implications of that were profound. So I have to tell you, I think we've got to continue to educate the elected leadership. We've got to show up at the Capitol, and we've got to make sure in every venue, whether it's through editorials that we write or letters to the editor, if we can get on a talk show and we can actually communicate on radio, remind everybody just how important this issue is to you and your family and how incredibly important it is to the survival of an industry that serves all economic development for our state. But I am optimistic and I'm more energetic than I feel like I've ever been in my professional career in the 17 years I've been doing this advocacy work. We're finally starting to get the attention we need.
Charmaine, again, always an impassioned plea. I always kid that if Charmaine coached any team in any sport in any place, she'd win a World Series, a Super Bowl, a Stanley Cup, whatever it may be. If you're not ready to run through a wall with Charmaine after hearing that, listen, certainly you probably need more energy drinks than I'm sitting over here drinking myself. I'd like to ask a follow-up question, Libbie, to you, because fortunately my colleague shared information on the Ready LA Coalition, and Charmaine alluded to it. What a wonderful way to get engaged and involved in this work if you're not already connected with us. Give us a little plug on that. And then again, attendees, any questions you have, any comments you'd like to make, raise your hand. We'll make sure we bring you into the discussion.
Absolutely. And it's really hard to follow Charmaine, but I will run into any wall any day, every day, for as long as I can live, because this is the work that we're so engaged in. To become involved and really be part of the movement, please become a part of the Ready Louisiana Coalition that, the Policy Institute for Children and United Way Southeast Louisiana and Jefferson Chamber actually helped start. It is a coalition made up of over 115 organizations, economic development, Chamber of Commerce, businesses, childcare providers, advocates. It's just a really diverse group of people, of organizations from across the state that are solely focused on increasing investment for early care and education in our state. When you have a movement like we're having now, and that we've all worked in for a number of years, when you have this type of coalition with such robust knowledge and ability to reach lawmakers and policymakers, changes happen. And we're seeing those changes. So we invite you to become part of Ready Louisiana. You can go to readylouisiana.org and become a member, and become a member online, and you'll get an email welcoming you and get you a part of the fold, and really arming you up to be able to be a voice for children in our state.
Thanks so much, Libbie. Great information, folks. Again, Ready LA Coalition, Ready Louisiana Coalition, a great way to get engaged, stay involved in this work. I'd like to call on, as I mentioned, our public policy chair, who has been active in the chat today, Ron McLean, our committee chair. Thanks so much for lending your time with us today. We're excited to hear from you.
Well, thanks so much, Kirby. And this is a question for Libbie and any other panelists. So I want to kind of, hopefully, Libbie, you talk about these connections. So right now we are experiencing a crisis, an everyday crisis relative to crime. often perpetrated by very young people, but some of them not far out of the age group that we're doing. And so when we think about the benefits, awesome benefits of early care and education, vigilance, support, some of the things that one of the speakers earlier was talking about, just the supportive services, the connections that are often afforded children during that time. Libbie, can you talk about the connections between doing this right and what impact that might have on crime and violence in our community?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ron. First, let me say we know that high quality matters, and that's where we see this return on investment and all the good things we see related to the outcomes for children that have benefited from high quality early care and education. Not many people will say this, but I will say this publicly. Poor quality is harmful. And so when we make public investments, we need to make sure we're making public investments in high quality early care and education. What we also know from research, from decades and decades of research, is when we invest in little people the way we need to with high quality early care and education, it pays off in dividends. It pays off in reduced juvenile justice crimes, which means it's not a death sentence. If you're in special education or you've been held back a year and you've been in the juvenile justice system. And so we recently put out a fact sheet really laying out the case of how prevention is early care and education and how that does reduce juvenile justice rates of juvenile justice in the system. And so, you know, I want to go back to something that Sonia said. Like, if we're talking about making sure we're investing in high quality early care and education, we're also investing in wraparound services. We're making sure that we have those infant mental health supports. We're also making sure that we're having supports for teachers that are living in trauma and you know, struggling on their own. And so it's not just about the little person, that little baby, that little kid that we're so worried about. We're worried also about their caregiver. We're worried about their family. And we're worried about, you know, as I listen to United, Charmaine and Michael, we talk about economic prosperity. We're also worrying about economic prosperity of our families and of our childcare providers so that they can invest in the economy and the system. And then that creates this wonderful, rich, contextual environment for families and children to thrive.
Ron, I would also say that you could speak to any sheriff across Louisiana, and I couldn't be more proud in our region. I know that the keynote speaker for the Chamber's annual luncheon this year is going to be Sheriff Lapinto, and I can tell you what, he just put together a fabulous video that spoke about why he supports the work that's being done by the Ready Start Network and the investment that's being made by the Jefferson Parish Council, because he fundamentally believes that high quality early care and education is the solution to making kids reach their full potential and never have to turn to a life of crime.
Absolutely, thanks. And so, and just to share one last thing, Michael and I chair the New Orleans Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and certainly reading proficiency is a major issue for our children, particularly low-income children. Some 89% of low-income children aren't reading at grade level by the end of the third grade, and certainly this has every implication for dropping out of school and, you know, doing things in a community that oftentimes results in the metro section, an article on the metro section of a newspaper, or seeing something on the news. But you know, when we talk about grade level reading, one of the major indicators of grade level reading is school readiness. And school readiness has everything to do with early care and education. So even as we look at the connection between reading proficiency and quality care and education, these things also have major implications for crime and violence in our community, because there'll be less children dropping out of school.
Ron, I need you to go on the road with Charmaine and I. Just we're going on the road, because these are the things that we need to talk about. We have 60% of our kindergartners entering into kindergarten not ready to learn. And that's not just about sound and simple relationship. That's about executive functioning of, you know, knowing how to, you know, wait your turn, not necessarily be in a line, but like wait your turn, being able to express your wants and needs. And you learn those basic skills when you're in a quality early learning environment. You learn those social emotional skills that to help you navigate through the world. And so, like, it takes all of us, and it takes funders, and it takes United Ways, and it takes policy institutes, it takes childcare providers, it takes mamas and daddies and caregivers to make this system work. And so we need all of you at the end of the day.
With that, Libbie, I think it's the perfect transition into our close here. I want to thank our guests, our attendees, our panelists, the advocates that have joined us on the call, our partner childcare providers. We're not here today having these conversations without someone like you in our life, or some childcare provider or caregiver that out of the kindness of their heart took care of ourselves or our loved ones in their homes if they were unable to afford care, which is so important why we're here today. Any closing notes you'd like to share with us, Libbie, before we wrap?
Absolutely. First, let me just say thank you to you all for being with us today. But we are so grateful for our partnership with the United Way of Southeast Louisiana, so that we could come together to discuss the importance of early care and education in our state and in our region. If Louisiana kicks the can down the road on this necessary investment, in 10 years, our state will experience a collective $12.1 billion loss. But if we make the investment and continue making it, we will experience a collective 1.8 billion economic gain. I'll leave you with this. Public investment in early childhood provides greater return on investment than any other time of life, because of the enormous benefits it has to our children, our working families, business, and the economy. So again, thank you to everyone who joined us today and for your commitment to the young children in Louisiana. I know we look forward to our continued partnership with you all, business leaders, elected officials, the Ready Louisiana Coalition members, and advocates to make high quality early care and education a priority in our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Libbie. Thank you again to everyone for joining us today for this very rich and engaging discussion. As a reminder, we're going to share this recording with you later on today. And I highly encourage you to share this conversation with your network, with your colleagues, with your friends and family who you think will join us in this fight to expand access to early care and education. You talk about going on the road. We will be at the Capitol for Early Ed Day later this year. You sign up through Ready LA Coalition or engage through any one of our organizations. You're going to learn how you can participate, whether you join us in person or you lend your voice virtually. We need your help. Reminder, folks, today is Early Ed Month, Social Media Day of Action. Hop on your Twitter, hop on your social media pages, engage in that conversation, and learn more about how you can lend your voice in super simple ways today to help expand access. Thank you all once again. Take care. And remember, folks, we have one life to live. To live better, we must live united. Bye.